Switching gears now to another topic, and it's one which some people have said, well, it could be the reason why we're experiencing this much uncertainty right now, because another election cycle is coming up. We have off-season elections coming up. The first one is coming up in Anambra a few months away. But the process is what they're questioning. How are we going to get there? There have been talks around amending the Electoral Act. Let's quickly welcome Mr. Clement Nwankwo, who is the Executive Director of Policy and Legal Advocacy Center. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily this morning.
Thank you, Makwe.
Well, I don't know if you see any connection between the current security challenge we're having and elections that are coming in 2023, but electoral amendments have been promised, and I think they were supposed to have been delivered before the first quarter of this year. Sadly, that hasn't happened, perhaps as a result of where we're currently at. But do you think that we could make progress on it before the end of this year?
I think there's a huge connection. Certainly what is happening is that chickens coming home to roost. Several actions that were taken in recent past is what has brought us to where we are. When people talked about appointing people because they are competent, they had a reason for saying so. But simply appointing people because they're from your clan, they are related to you, they're from your ethnic group, they're from your religion, not looking at competence, that's what has brought us to where we are today. And I think that's what the connection is with the elections, that because the security system, the security architecture has virtually collapsed, you might have a situation where there are open spaces of insecurity around the elections, and the question would be, how can you conduct elections in certain places? Indeed, in a huge number of places. And this has been on since 2011, when elections had to be conducted in IDP camps. Some people were running elections in remote parts of the country from Abuja. They were campaigning without being in the constituency. And now that number of constituencies has expanded incredibly. Police stations are being attacked. People are being killed. People are scared. People are leaving certain areas in droves. So it's a worrying situation. Looking towards 2023 elections.
It's definitely changing the population. I don't say the demographics now, because it's not just having to do with the type of population that is there, but also in terms of the numbers in certain constituencies. Some areas might be totally empty, and you might find entire populations moving to other areas. For instance, those who have been displaced in the 50 villages in Niger State, for instance, who are now in IDP camps, or those who have relocated from villages in Benue to Benue Central, somewhere in Makodi, and elections are going to take place in places like that. I mean, it definitely does change what would have happened in the original places and what is going to happen in the places where they currently are residing. How is our act taking care of those kinds of situations? It's
worrying for demographics. INEC is struggling. In this week, INEC has been going around looking how to convert polling points to polling units, but this is based on the experience even from the most recent elections in 2019. Looking towards 2023, if you see that the demographics have changed, how are you going to deal with those who were registered at one place but have moved? And a lot of movement has taken place. Even within the FCT, within urban centers like Lagos, like Port Harcourt, things have changed so very rapidly. And I worry for INEC, because INEC is struggling to keep pace with the changes that are going on around the country, especially driven by insecurity. And that's why the INEC chairman, speaking yesterday at the National Assembly, had said to the National Assembly, please, can you give us the Electoral Act? And that is a worry of every Nigerian. We have no understanding why the legislative process is not concluding as early as was promised by the leadership of the National Assembly.
Now, Senator Kabir Gaya was initially quite optimistic about delivering it in the first quarter. They said that they had already taken the inputs and what have you. Well, can you tell us some of the most important changes that we're expecting in the amended Electoral Act?
Two things. First, Senator Kabiru Gaya, the House Chair, Honorable Aisha Duku, yes, I'm talking of both Senator Gaya in the Senate and Aisha Duku in the House, had expressed this optimism. But more importantly, the Senate President, Dr. Ahmed Lawan, the Speaker, Dr. Femi Gbajabiamila, had also made the same commitments. And, you know, when you're a political leader and you make a commitment, Nigerians take it seriously. So when you say to Nigerians, the Electoral Act will be passed in the first quarter of 2021, in that position, it confers a lot of seriousness to what you have said. And I think that's the disappointment that Nigerians have. And when you look at the current proposals, what the Electoral Act is saying, or the Electoral Act amendment is saying, is we are repealing the 2010 with all of the amendments made to it and replacing it with a new Electoral Act that captures the 3 subsequent amendments that were made to the Electoral Act 2010 and introducing new things. And some of the new things includes giving INEC the discretion to decide how to conduct elections. And INEC has gone so very far in deciding that electronics, technology, would drive several aspects of the elections. That is what the new Electoral Act bill has captured. It's also captured the whole issue around increasing the participation and inclusivity for disabled persons. It has also captured how you can collate results of elections and how you can transmit it, and emphasizes that this can and should be driven by technology. So there are a whole lot of innovations in the proposals before the National Assembly. And I do know that the 2 chambers of the National Assembly had independently looked through all of this. The committees had met several times. Then they had joint sessions, including joint public hearing, where they listened to all of the stakeholders who have views to impute into the electoral bill. All of that had been taken in. And what was now left at the end of this exercise, and this ended in December last year, was to now table it before plenary. And that's why, and that's where now we are looking for where the act is, or where the bill is. And I think that 4 months into 2021, and we have no sense of where the bill is worrying. And I think that for a lot of Nigerians, the demand is now strong that the National Assembly should get the work done by the committees into plenary, discuss it, and pass the electoral bill.
Well, I want to believe that your CSO, I mean, that's something you've done beautifully for Nigerians. You've kept an eye on how that bill has progressed in both chambers of the National Assembly. Is that correct?
Yes, we have followed that very closely.
And they have said that they were going to marry, they wanted the 2 committees in the House to marry the many changes that were coming into the bill. Have they been able to do that successfully? Because
we followed it closely, we know that the 2 chambers worked closely together and have a common bill. And those bills, the common bill is now what is supposed to go into the plenary of both chambers of the National Assembly. And
so what is left now is for it to come to plenary?
Is to come to plenary, and that's why we're quite worried that there is a delay.
Indeed. That's worrisome indeed. But yesterday we saw Honorable Onyejiota, Nkiru Onyejiota, talking about how women are also making serious plans to include affirmative action, to include women, having more women in the House and also in government in general. And she was talking about how, I think for the House, they're expecting there'll be 2 more constituencies created to ensure that women, or 2 more spaces in each state for women, and I think in the Senate 1 more space for women, and then in the State House of Assembly, I wasn't quite clear on that one, but in the Federal Capital Territory, there'll be 1 extra, I think, created also to ensure that women are coming in. The first question is, how is this going to work? If you're creating more constituencies, what are the guarantees that political parties will be willing to field women? And the second is, isn't this already increasing the cost of governance which we want to come down?
When we look at the Second Republic, the 1979 Constitution guided it. And the 1979 Constitution had a provision for 450 seats for the House of Representatives. What the 1999 Constitution did was to reduce it. The 1979 Constitution also had provisions for 5 seats, Senate seats for each state.
5 Senate seats?
Yes, that was...
Well, the states were much bigger then.
Yes.
The states were much bigger. Right now, the states are much smaller.
Yes, but it had 5 seats for senates, for women, for representation. What you have seen now is, of course, that there are less numbers in terms of the House of Representatives, less numbers in terms of the senatorial representation.
And we're still complaining that there are still too many.
Then it came to about 545. With these new seats being proposed, because when you look at, I think it's very worrisome, and Nigeria continues to be on the back in terms of all of the achievements being made around the world. When you look at our neighbors, when you look around the world, when you look at African countries, the numbers of women is impressive. You look at Rwanda, more than 50% of seats are taken up by women. When you look at Senegal, they have what they call parité, which means parity, equal numbers of men and women. And you look around, more and more women are being represented. What we have seen in Nigeria since 1999, when this Fourth Republic came in, is that you have less and less women. Today we have only 6 senators that are women.
Out of 109?
Out of 109. And about 27, 28 in the House of Representatives.
I'm letting you make that point because, I mean, I want our viewers to be able to appreciate why this is needed.
It is needed.
However, the question is this the only way we can include women?
I think all the options have been looked at. All the options have been looked at because when you go towards the Beijing Declaration or even national policy on women, it says 35% in both elected and appointive positions. This hasn't happened. When you look at the political parties, their discrimination against women is incredible. In some cases, even men are women leaders in political party positions.
So how do we ensure, I mean, without exactly increasing the number of people, because I doubt very strongly, a lot of, I don't know, even though it would seem that this has been accepted by the Honorable Nkiru, I don't know if you can play her track, says that, you know, this has been accepted largely, but they're still lobbying. They are still lobbying to ensure that, you know, this eventually goes through. However, looking at just how big it's going to make, you know, it's going to increase the numbers in both chambers of the National Assembly. Is this really the way to go?
I think it's the way to go. I think that unless you legislate that political parties must field a certain number of women, with the current numbers available now, unless you do that successfully, then you're not going to see any significant change. And there's been a lot of resistance to that proposal. That proposal has been on the table for years, and no one has been courageous enough to do so. What is happening is simply that the National Assembly, the State House of Assembly, hopefully will come on board on this, as saying that for each state creates 2 more seats. INEC would have the responsibility of delineating the state into 2 so that you can elect 2 women. And in this case, the parties have no discretion about it. It must be women. Then the entire state has to elect 1 more person for Senate who will be a woman. And the parties have no discretion about it. They have to field a woman. And for the State House of Assembly, because if you look at the State House of Assembly today, some states have no women in the State House of Assembly. In fact, a majority of states have no more than 2 or 3 women. To the point that the women committee, which is not a bad thing, but the women committee is being headed by men, simply because there are no women in some State House of Assembly to chair those committees. You would think that if a man chairs a women's committee, then perhaps he would be more persuasive and all of that. But having a man chair a women's committee only because there is no woman emphasizes the depth of the problem that we are in. And I think that if the country has to pay a little bit more to ensure that a significant part of its population are effective in governance, then I think that means a lot. And you cannot have some of the best educated people in the world, some of the best accomplished part of the gender divide excluded from your politics. And maybe perhaps that's why the country is where it is in today, the absence of women in the room.
You know, I want to really be biased on that and say maybe that's why we are where we are. But let's quickly listen to Honorable Nkiru Onyejocha and then flip this to Lagos.
Amendments.
Other countries have made this concerted effort to think outside the box. How will it work? And I believe that this is the only way it works in this country, because you have a lot of people that you agree with something on principle, and then the next day people talk to them and they change their mind. So, but if it's law, and I can tell you that the president have directed some ministers to liaise with parliament to see that women are included. And so we are lobbying everybody to make sure that this one passes. So the issue of party not being able to fill anybody, party A doesn't want to fill a woman, party B will fill.
Yeah, Mr. Nwankwo, just wondering, you know, the last two general elections, major ones, we've had postponements for a while now. So with this planned amendment of the Electoral Act, how is that going to impact on subsequent general elections such that there will be no need whatsoever to have any postponement? Because we remember that the current INEC chairman did say we needed to have a conversation about electoral management in this country.
Thank you, Chamberlain. When you look at the current proposals in the bill before the National Assembly, it even brings forward the process of nomination of candidates, which means that if the bill were to pass today, you will have to see political parties begin nominations of the nomination processes in the first quarter of next year. So in reality, the next elections is around the corner, and I think that's the worry that most Nigerians express when they see that so much has not been done in this current dispensation, and so much is still pending, and the law itself has not been passed. But once it begins on time, it then means that everything would be in place. The political parties will have enough notice issued by INEC. They would have enough time to prepare for their primaries. INEC would have enough time to prepare in terms of being able to ensure that the nomination process is conducted well, that they monitor it and get results, and prepare all of the processes leading up to the elections. Most times, the elections are postponed because the Electoral Commission has not had enough time to prepare. And when you look at the postponements that happened on April 2nd of 2011, and happened again in 2015, and happened again in 2019, it's been indicative of the delay in preparedness of the Electoral Commission. Some of it caused by, of course, the delay in passing the Electoral Act, and then all of the logistics issues around political parties not being able to conduct rancor-free primaries. So I think that they worry about getting the National Assembly to just really go ahead and pass the Electoral Act is something that all of us are very anxious to see the National Assembly do. And I've had some reports from the National Assembly saying, oh, there's a sequence that they want to follow. They want to pass the PIB in May and pass the Electoral Act in June. If the committees, joint committees of the National Assembly on electoral matters have done their work, then I don't see why the Electoral Act should not have been scheduled in the order paper for immediate plenary discussions to begin. I don't see the connection between PIB and the Electoral Act. The PIB has been in the National Assembly for more than 15 years, and we are heading towards the point where the PIB will become obsolete itself, simply because the world is moving ahead, and we are still here talking about oil. The world is moving to other sources of energy. Countries that had relied a lot on oil.
Just one moment, Mr. Nwankwo.
Their state assets. Saudi Arabia last week was talking about.
Well, there are so many issues to address on all of this matter, and most certainly it is as disconcerting as can be. You know, I mean, you've talked about the logistics, even though there are questions about that we wanted to bring to you, and then you've also talked about the preparedness of the political class and all of that, or a lack of it. But I don't know if you can tell us how these amendments, these proposed amendments, and the bill that we want to become a law addresses the finances or financing of elections, especially from the party levels. Because you know that so many people would say, look, how will the young people that will want to come into politics be able to afford the costs of getting forms, of campaigning and stuff like that? In any way, how do you think this law, this new proposition, addresses some of these concerns?
In the electoral law, there is what you call campaign limits, levels of campaign finance, and this new law has looked at it and made suggestions on the extent of funding of it. When you look at the previous law, it sets limits of what can be spent. And so for the Senate, it sets a certain limit, for the House, for the presidency, for the governorship. But when you look at what has happened to our currency, and inflation and the economy, even with the suggested reductions in terms of what can be spent, you would find that the politicians always find loopholes. And I think that what the Electoral Act is seeking to do is to create processes for internal democracy within the parties, because the key thing within political parties is to what extent do you ensure that your internal processes opens up the space for all of those stakeholders within it to seek elections, the inclusivity of the process, whether it's of young people, of women, of persons who are hampered or handicapped in some ways. How do you get all of them to be able to participate in the process without the internal crookedness of the political parties affecting the aspirations of those who want to participate in governance? And I think that is what you do have the Electoral Act trying to address. But I think the major thing is also the understanding of individuals. To some extent, you can regulate human conduct, but in a lot of ways, we found that the intricacies of human behavior has always found a way of wriggling around the problem, and that has been part of the challenge of inclusivity for persons in the Nigerian political process.
Well, we definitely look forward to the Electoral Act getting the attention that it deserves, because I just don't know how that is going to work, especially with the current situation. But hopefully, you know, the members, especially the principal officers, will remember their promise, their commitment to deliver this in the first quarter. Now that they're behind schedule, perhaps apologize for that and see how it is that they can bring this back to the fore and give it the ready attention that it deserves. And it's also very good to see that we're looking for how to work, according to Nwankwo, the remaining valuable percentage of our assets, and that's talking about the inclusion of women. We continue to thank you for keeping an eye on things for us on behalf of Nigerians. Thank you so much for that and for sharing your thoughts this morning, Mr. Clement Nwankwo, who is the Executive Director of Policy and Legal Advocacy Center. Thank you so much for coming on Sunrise Daily.
Thank you, Mokbe.
Well, that's where we have to leave it for the show today. Thank you for sending in your comments. Let us know what you make of the fact that now there are also proposals to include women compulsorily, as a matter of fact, into the National Assembly by creating 2 extra spaces in each state for the House and then 1 seat extra for the Senate. What are your thoughts on that, and how do you think it's going to work? Thank you for watching this morning. I'm Nwankwo Yusuf.
Well, perhaps you should also add, what are your thoughts on including youths as well?
Well, you just added that.
Well, yeah, I mean, come on. because I mean, it is equally critical. Have a wonderful day. I'm Ayo Makinde.
We'll see you next time. I'm Chamberlain Musa. Goodbye.